The station was old, not ancient-like. The things the elder races built, not grand or beautiful or wrapped in energy. Fields that hummed with the knowledge of a million years. It was just old in the human way, scratched metal walls, flickering lights that the maintenance crew kept promising to fix, a coffee machine in the break room that made a sound like a dying animal every time someone pressed the button for black, no sugar. Meridian 9 sat at the edge of known space, a small steel box floating in a sea of nothing. It was a deep space relay station, which was a fancy way of saying it was a place where signals came in and signals went out, and very little else happened. The crew of 14 lived their days in quiet routine. They monitored frequencies, they logged data, and they argued about whose turn it was to clean the shared bathroom on Deck 3. It was not an exciting life, but Dr. Lena Ortiz had not come here for excitement. She had come here because the universe was full of noise, and somewhere inside that noise she believed were things worth hearing. Lena was a signals analyst. She had spent 12 years studying the electromagnetic whispers of deep space, the background radiation of dead stars, the faint echoes of civilizations so far away that their light had not yet reached human eyes. She was good at her job. She was patient, and on the night of March 7, 2387, her patience was rewarded. It started as a flicker on her screen, a tiny spike in the data stream, barely visible against the background noise. Most people would have missed it. Most people would have written it off as interference, a solar flare bouncing off a piece of space junk, nothing important. But Lena did not write things off. She leaned forward in her chair, pushed her glasses up her nose, and pulled the spike apart layer by layer. It took her 3 hours of staring at numbers and waveforms, of running the signal through every filter and decoder. She had. The coffee machine screamed twice during those hours, and she did not hear it either time. When she finally understood what she was looking at, she sat very still for a long moment. Then she stood up, walked to the door of the signals lab, and called down the corridor in a voice that did not sound like her own. Someone get the captain. Captain Tomas Ayala was 57 years old. He had served in the human Navy for 30 years before they put him in charge of Meridian 9, which everyone understood was a polite way of saying they had put him on a shelf. He was too old for combat, too stubborn for politics, and too honest for diplomacy. So they gave him a relay station at the edge of nowhere and told him to keep the lights on. He arrived in the signals lab 4 minutes after Lena called, still pulling on his uniform jacket, his gray hair uncombed. He looked at Lena's face, and the jacket was forgotten. Show me, he said. Lena showed him. The signal was a cascade pulse. Even Ayala, who was no scientist, knew what that meant. Cascade pulses were emergency distress beacons used by the elder races, the vast and ancient civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for longer than humanity had existed. These species, hundreds of them, joined together in a political body called the Concord of Elder Races, had technologies that made human science look like children playing with sticks. Their ships moved faster than light. Their cities floated between stars. Their oldest members had been alive when Earth was still covered in ice, and their distress beacons were not something you heard every day. Where is it coming from? Ayala asked. Lena pointed at the star chart on the wall. Her finger landed on a region marked in red, a place where the map became vague. An uncertain, clear's throat where the neat lines of known space dissolved into warnings and question marks, the void. Scar expanse, she said. Issa stared at the map. The void scar was a wound in space itself, a vast region where some ancient war had torn reality apart. Gravity did not work properly there, or time moved strangely. Ships that entered did not come back. The elder races avoided it. Humanity had never even considered going near it. What does they signal say? Ayala asked. Lena played it for him. She had translated it from Arai, the shared language of the conquered, and the words filled the small room like a ghost. We are dying. The lattice is failing. Any conquered vessel respond. We are dying. The lattice is failing. Any conquered vessel respond. It repeated over and over, a loop of desperation sent out into the dark by someone who was running out of time. Who are they? Yala asked. Quietly, the signal identifies them as the Vithari. Lena said. I had to look them up. They are a member species of the conquered, bioluminescent, communal, non-aggressive. Their civilization is built around a structure called the lattice. How a kind of living space station, approximately 6 billion. 6 billion, the number hung in the air between them. Have you forwarded this to Sencom? Yal asked. Yes, and I sent it to the nearest conquered relay boy. That is standard protocol for any elder race distress signal we intercept. Ayala nodded. Good, then we wait. They waited. The crew of Meridian 9 gathered in the common room and talked in low voices, while the signal played on a loop through the station speakers. 6 billion people somewhere in the dark, calling for help. The sound of it settled into their bones. The conquereds' response arrived 4 hours later. It came as an automated diplomatic packet, clean and precise and stamped with the seal of the conquered central authority. Lena opened it at her console. She read it once, then she read it again, and because she was certain she had made a mistake, she had not made a mistake. The message was short. It said, Signal acknowledged, species of origin Vithari, rescue assessment non-viable, resource expenditure exceeds projected survival probability, no fleet will be dispatched. Lena read it a third time. The words did not change. She printed it out because she felt like something this terrible should exist on paper, should have weight and texture, should be something you could hold in your hands and feel the wrongness of. She carried it to the common room where the crew was waiting, and she set it on the table and said nothing. They read it one by one. Nobody spoke for a long time. It was Engineer First Class Diego Reyes who broke the silence. He was 24 years old and had been on Meridian 9 for only 3 months, and he had not yet learned to hide what he was feeling. They are just going to let them die. When he said 6 billion people, and they ran the numbers and decided it was not worth it. The void scar is extremely dangerous, said Dr. Priya Chandra, the station's astrophysicist. She was trying to be reasonable. Her voice shook anyway. The conquered is not wrong about the risk. Any rescue fleet would face enormous losses just getting there, so you do not send a fleet and 6 billion people die in the dark. Ray said that is the answer. That is what the great and wise elder races decided. Nobody had a response to that. Captain Ayala stood at the back of the room. He had not spoken since Lena brought the message. He watched his crew. Why these 14 people on their small and unimportant station, and he saw what was happening on their faces. He saw the anger and the grief and the helplessness, and underneath all of it, the thing that made humans what they were, the thing the elder races had calculated out of their own hearts million years ago. The inability to hear someone crying for help and do nothing. He walked to the communications console. He opened a secure channel to CENTCOM, the Combined Exploratory and Naval Tactical Command, humanity's highest military authority. He entered authorization code. He waited for the connection to establish, and then he said 6 words that would change the course of human history. We should answer that signal. The response from CENTCOM was immediate and predictable. Admiral Chen, the duty commander, May told Yala that he appreciated the sentiment, but that humanity did not have the ships, the technology, or the political authority to mount a rescue mission into the Voidscar expanse. Entering conquered, monitored space without authorization could be seen as an act of aggression. Humanity's position in galactic politics was fragile enough without provoking the elder races. IA listened to all of this patiently. Then he said with respect, Admiral, I did not ask for a risk assessment. I said we should answer the signal. Captain Ayala, you are commanding a relay station, not a battle group. I'm aware of that, sir, but I am also aware that 6 billion people are dying right now while we discuss procedure. The channel went silent for a long moment. Then Admiral Chen said, I will escalate this to the Joint Chiefs. Do not do anything foolish. Thomas Ayala closed the channel. He turned to find his entire crew standing behind him. Watching, he looked at their faces one by one and saw the same thing in every pair of eyes. It is not our call anymore, he said. But I wanted them to hear it from someone. 3 days passed. The signal kept pulsing. Lena monitored it obsessively, tracking its strength, measuring the gaps between repetitions. The gaps were getting longer. The Vithari were losing power. During those 3 days, Lena did something she had not been asked to do. She went back to the original signal and she tore it apart. Again, deeper this time, looking at layers she had not examined before. Signals were like rivers. They carried things with them, sediment and debris, traces of where they had been and how they had traveled. Lena was very good at reading rivers. What she found changed everything. She found the targeting data. Every signal had a target, direction, and intended recipient. The Concord's Cascade Pulse System was designed to reach specific Concord relay networks to funnel distress calls to the nearest Elder Race Fleet Command. That was how it was supposed to work. That was what everyone assumed the Vithari had done, but the Vithari had not done that. The targeting data showed that the Vithari had aimed their signal everywhere, not at the Concord, not at any specific species or fleet or authority. They had pointed their dying cry at the entire galaxy in every direction, on every frequency, as loud as they could make it. It was a scream thrown into the void with no expectation of who might hear it. Watch. The Concord had received it because the Concord had receivers everywhere, but the signal was not addressed to the Concord. It was addressed to anyone, to everyone, to whoever was listening. The elder races had heard it and decided that only they were qualified to respond, and then decided not to. They had appointed themselves the gatekeepers of a cry for help and then locked the gate. But the signal had leaked through. It had traveled further than the Concord expected, carried by the strange physics of the void scar, amplified by the very distortions that made the region so dangerous. It had reached the galactic fringe. It had reached a small, unimportant relay station crewed by a species that the elder races considered barely worth noticing. The signal was not meant for humans. Humans were not important enough. Humans were not old enough, wise enough, powerful enough. The Vithari had probably never even heard of humans. No one had considered for a moment that the small, young, fragile species on the edge of nowhere would be the ones to hear the call, but they heard it. Lena brought her findings to Captain Ayala. He read her report in silence. When he finished, he set it down and looked out the window at the stars. They were not calling us, he said. No, Lena said, but we heard them. Yes. Ayala was quiet for a long time. The signal pulsed in the background, that desperate repeating voice growing weaker with every cycle. 6 billion lives attached to a fading whisper. It does not matter who they were calling, Ayala said finally. What matters is who answers. He opened the channel to Sencom again. This time he sent not just a request but Lena's full report. When the signal analysis, the targeting data, the proof that the Concord had turned its back not just on the Vithari, but on the very principle that a cry for help should be answered. He sent it to the Joint Chiefs, to the Senate, to every military and civilian authority in human space, and then, because he was Tomas Ayala and he had never in his life been good at waiting for permission, he sent it to the press. Within hours, every human being with access to a news feed knew about the Vatari. They knew about the signal. They knew about the Concord's response, and they knew that somewhere in the most dangerous region of the galaxy, 6 billion people were dying alone because the universe's greatest civilization had decided they were not worth saving. The reaction was not political. It was not strategic. It was not calculated. It was human. On Earth, people gathered in the streets. On Mars, the Colonial Assembly held an emergency session that lasted 14 hours. On Titan, dock workers refused to go home until their representatives promised action. On the frontier colonies, where life was hard and resources were thin and people understood in their bones what it meant to be alone and afraid and far from help, the response was loudest of all. The message was simple, and it came from everywhere at once, from every corner of human civilization, spoken in 100 languages but meaning the same thing. Someone is dying. We have to help. Ayala stood at the window of Meridian 9 and watched the comm channels light up. Message after message after message. A tide of human voices rising against the cold mathematics of the Concord. He was an old man on a forgotten station at the edge of nowhere. He had not expected any of this when he opened that channel. He had just said what he believed, but that was the thing about humans. You only needed one of them to say the obvious thing, the thing that everyone was already feeling, and the rest would follow, not because they were told to, not because it was smart or safe or sensible snorts, but because there was something in them, something the elder races had lost or never had, something that heard a cry in the dark and would not turn away. The signal pulsed weaker now, but still there, and on the far side of the galaxy, in the ancient halls of the Concord, where species that had watched stars be born and die sat in their perfect chairs and made their perfect calculations, a small, Notification appeared on a monitoring screen. It noted that the young species, called humanity, appeared to be mobilizing in response to the Vithari distress signal. The notification was flagged as a low-priority curiosity. Nobody paid it much attention. They would learn in time that this was a mistake. The argument lasted 6 weeks. It was the loudest, most bitter, most passionate argument humanity had with itself in a generation, and it happened everywhere at once. In the Senate chambers on Earth, where politicians who had not raised their voices in decades stood and shouted at each other across the floor, in the colony assemblies on Mars and Titan, in the frontier worlds, where representatives who normally fought about water rights and trade tariffs suddenly found themselves debating the meaning of being human. Only in kitchens and classrooms and factory floors and the cramped quarters of deep space cargo haulers, where ordinary people watched the news and felt something they could not quite name burning in their chests. The question was simple. The answer was not, should humanity send a fleet into the most dangerous region of known space to rescue a species they had never met? The case against it was strong. Senator Margaret Delacroix of Earth's European bloc laid it out with calm, precise logic on the floor of the governing Senate, and every word of it was true. Humanity did not have the resources to spare. Their navy was small, designed for border patrol and colony defense, not deep space rescue operations. Voidscar Expanse was a death trap that even the elder races refused to enter. There was no guarantee the Vatari could be saved, even if a fleet reached them. And if the mission failed, if ships were lost and people died, humanity would be weaker, more vulnerable, more alone than before. We are asking our children to die for strangers, Senator Delacroix said. And her voice was steady, but her hands were not. I'm not certain that is a choice we have the right to make. The case for it was not logical at all. It was made by a retired school teacher named Gloria Vasquez, who somehow got 3 minutes on a live broadcast and spent those 3 minutes saying things that no politician would say, because politicians had learned to be careful with their words. I taught children for 40 years, Gloria Vasquez said, standing in her small apartment on the colony world of Arhuan, when looking directly into the camera with the kind of calm that comes from having made peace with the world a long time ago. And every year on the first day of class, I told them the same thing. I told them that the measure of who you are is not what you do when it is easy. It is what you do when it is hard, when it costs you something, when the smart thing to do is walk away and you do not walk away. She paused. She adjusted her glasses. 6 billion people are dying, she said. They asked for help. If we do not go, then what are we? What were all those lessons for? The broadcast was watched by 80 million people within a day. The phrase, what were all those lessons for, was written on walls and signs in the hulls of ships across human space. Admiral Kessler Rohr was not a man who was moved by speeches, where he was 61 years old, built like a piece of industrial equipment, and had a face that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and regret. He had fought in the border wars, the ugly little conflicts where human ships clashed with pirate groups and rogue colonies on the frontier. He had lost friends, lost ships, and earned a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a gift from a piece of shrapnel that the doctors said should have killed him when they Joint Chiefs asked him to assess the feasibility of a rescue mission to the Voitskar expanse. He did not give them a speech, he gave them a report. It was 47 pages long, dense with technical data and tactical projections, and it boiled down to a single paragraph on the final page. The mission is feasible, wrote Wicker. It will require a minimum fleet of 25 vessels, including combat, transport and science platforms. Navigation through the Voitskar will require real-time adaptive course correction, which our current technology can support but not guarantee. We will lose ships, we will lose people. The survival probability for the fleet as a whole is approximately 62%. For individual vessels, it varies between 40 and 80%, depending on position and role. He paused in his writing, then he added one more line. It can be done if we are willing to be stupid and stubborn about it. The Joint Chiefs read the report. They passed it to the Senate. The Senate argued for 3 more days, and while they argued, something extraordinary happened. It started on the Colony World of Ceres, where the owner of a small private shipyard sent a message to CENTCOM offering 2 cargo vessels and the crews to fly them. Within hours, similar offers began arriving from across human space. Shipyards on Mars offered holes. Engineering firms on Titan offered reactor components. Mining operations on the Frontier offered fuel. Medical teams volunteered. Navigation specialists volunteered. People who had never served in the military and had no reason to risk their lives for strangers sent messages saying the same thing in 1,000 different ways. I can help. Tell me what you need. It was not organized. No one planned it. No government agency coordinated it. It simply happened the way a river happens when enough rain falls in the same place. Individual drops becoming streams, streams becoming currents, the currents becoming something unstoppable. A retired engineer named Harold Park, 73 years old and living on a pension in a small apartment on Luna, sent a message to CENTCOM that contained detailed schematics for a modified navigation array that he had designed 20 years ago and never built. The design was meant for exactly the kind of gravitational chaos found in the voids he had created. It as a theoretical exercise, never expecting it would be needed. His message was 4 words long. You might need this. CENTCOM's engineers looked at the schematics. They looked at each other. They started building. The Senate voted on a Tuesday afternoon, Earth time. The motion to authorize the formation of a rescue fleet passed by a margin of 11 votes. It was the narrowest margin in Senate history. Senators who voted yes would later describe it as the most terrifying vote of their careers, not because they feared the political consequences, but because they understood the weight of what they were authorizing. They were sending people to die. Not all of them, maybe not even most of them, but some of them certainly would not come back, and the Senate was saying that was acceptable, that the attempt was worth the cost, that 6 billion strangers on the other side of a wound in space mattered enough to justify the price. Senator Dell'Acqua voted no. When asked about it afterwards, she said simply, I stand by my position, but I hope with everything I have that I am wrong. Admiral Rohr was given command of the mission, but he accepted with a single nod and immediately began the work of turning a wave of goodwill into a functioning military operation. It was, by any reasonable measure, an impossible task. The fleet that came together over the following weeks was nothing like the elegant armadas of the elder races. It was a patchwork, a collection of whatever humanity could scrape together. In the time they had, warships pulled from border patrol cargo vessels, hastily retrofitted with medical bays and emergency shelters, science platforms loaded with equipment that had never been tested outside a laboratory, escort frigates so old that their crews joked about the ships being held together by hope and duct tape. They called it the Answering Fleet. The name was not official. It was not chosen by a committee or approved by the Senate. It came from a young communications officer on the frigate Resolute who used it in a personal letter to her family, and the letter was shared and the name spread. And by the time anyone thought to give the fleet an official designation, it was too late. The Answering Fleet, it was 12 warships, 6 heavy transports, 4 science vessels, a swarm of escort, frig and support craft, in total 31 vessels carrying just over 9,000 human beings. By elder race standards it was laughable. The Concorde's smallest patrol group carried more firepower than the entire Answering Fleet combined. Their ships were faster, stronger, better shielded, better armed and crewed by beings with millions of years of space faring experience. Humanity's fleet was in comparison a collection of tin cans held together by welding and stubbornness, but it was what they had. And it was going. Captain Tomasi received his orders on a cold morning at the CENTCOM facility on Earth's moon. He was being recalled to active duty and assigned as fleet liaison aboard the flagship, the UNS Defiance. The Defiance was the newest vessel in the human navy, which meant it was only 12 years old and most of its systems worked properly. Most of the time, Ayala had not expected to be included. He had expected to watch from Meridian 9 to monitor the mission from his relay station and hope for the best. When he read his orders, he sat down heavily in a chair and stared at the wall for several minutes. Then he packed his bag. It did not take long. He did not own many things. Dr. Lena Ortiz was assigned to the science vessel when she had not volunteered exactly. She had simply informed CENTCOM that she was the leading expert on the V-Thari signal and that any attempt to navigate to the signal source without her analysis would be significantly more dangerous. This was true, and CENTCOM knew it was true, and so they gave her berth on the Curry and pretended it had been their idea. The fleet assembled in stages over 3 weeks, ships arriving from across human space, docking at the Luna staging area for final preparations. Engineers worked around the clock. Harold Park's navigation array was built and installed on the Defiance. Modified versions were distributed to every vessel in the fleet. They were untested. They were theoretical. They were the best chance anyone had. During those weeks, the Concorde of elder races sent a formal diplomatic communique to humanity's government. It arrived through the standard channels stamped with the seals of 7 elder race species, written in the precise and bloodless language of galactic diplomacy. The Concorde of elder races acknowledges humanity's stated intention to conduct operations in the Voidscar expanse. The Concorde advises in the strongest possible terms that such operations are inadvisable. The Voidscar expanse is classified as a restricted Hazard zone under conquered navigational authority. Any losses sustained by human vessels within this zone will be the sole responsibility of the human species. The conquered will not provide escort support, navigation assistance, or rescue services where this communicate serves as formal notice that humanity proceeds at its own risk. The subtext was not subtle. Don't embarrass yourselves. Don't make us watch you die. And above all, don't expect us to care when it goes wrong. Admiral Rohr read the communique in his office aboard the Defiance. He read it carefully because Rohr was a careful man, and then he forwarded it to every ship in the fleet. With a note attached, read this. Understand it, they are not coming to help us, we are on our own. If that changes your mind, there is no shame in stepping off. If it does not change your mind, I will see you at departure. Not a single person stepped off. The night before departure, Captain Ayala walked the corridors of the Defiance. The ship was buzzing with activity, crews running final checks, loading supplies, testing systems. He passed through the mess hall, where off-duty personnel sat in small groups talking quietly. Some were writing letters, some were playing cards, some were just sitting, staring at nothing, making their peace with what was coming. He stopped at a viewport on the observation deck. Through the thick glass, he could see the fleet spread out against the stars, 31 ships there, running lights blinking in the dark, small and fragile and absurdly brave. Beyond them, the galaxy stretched out in its cold and ancient vastness, the territory of species that had been building empires when humanity was still learning to make fire. A young officer appeared beside him, clears throat. Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka, assigned to the frigate Kestrel. She was 30 years old, small and sharp-featured, and with a reputation for being one of the best tactical pilots in the fleet. Captain, she said, couldn't sleep either. No, I said. They stood together in silence for a moment, looking at the stars. Are we doing the right thing? Tanaka asked. It was not a challenge, it was a genuine question, asked by a woman who was about to risk her life and wanted to hear the answer. One more time. Ayala thought about it. He thought about the signal, still pulsing, weaker every day. He thought about 6 billion beings he had never met dying in the dark, their call for help answered by silence. He thought about the Conquered's message, that cold calculation, that precise and mathematical indifference. I do not know if it is the right thing, he said honestly, but I know it is not the wrong thing, and sometimes that is enough. Tanaka nodded slowly. That is enough for me, she said. She left. Issa stayed at the viewport a while longer. In the reflection of the glass, he could see his own face, older than he remembered, tired in a way that sleep would not fix. Behind his reflection, the stars burned on, indifferent to the small dramas of small creatures, but the small creatures were going anyway. The fleet departed at 600 hours, Earth Standard Time, on a Thursday morning that most of humanity would remember for the rest of their lives. The ships moved in formation, a slow procession of steel and light, passing the orbital stations and the lunar colonies in the defense platforms that marked the boundary of Earth's domain. People watched from every vantage point. On Earth, crowds gathered at observatories and rooftops, and on the colonies, workers stopped and pressed their faces to windows. Children held up handmade signs that the fleet could not see, but that somehow mattered. Anyway, as the fleet passed the last Concord monitoring buoy at the edge of human space. Its sensors tracked them. Silently, data was transmitted to Concord intelligence networks. In the halls of the elder races, where beings of immense age and power conducted the business of a galaxy, the departure was noted with mild interest on a Concord observation platform orbiting a nameless star. Two ambassadors watched the fleet trajectory on a display screen. One was a Scalith, an ancient amphibian species, whose members lived for 10,000 years and who had seen civilizations rise and fall like tides. The other was a Dren, a crystalline being whose species communicated through resonance and who were known throughout the galaxy as philosophers and observers. The Slith ambassador studied the tiny dots of the human fleet as they moved toward the voids. Her large dark eyes held an expression that might have been pity. "They know they're going to die, don't they?" she said quietly. The Dren tilted its crystalline head, light refracted through its body, casting small rainbows on the walls. It considered the question with the careful attention that its species gave to all things they know. It said, "That is what makes them interesting." The Scath made a sound that did not translate into any human language. It was the sound her species made when they encountered something they did not understand, which was rare for a being that had lived for 8,000 years. "Interesting," she repeated. "Is that what we are calling it now?" "I do not have a better word," the Dren admitted. They watched the fleet until it was too far away to track. Then the display went dark and they returned to the business of the Concord, and they humans were forgotten, as humans always were, by a galaxy that had never learned their names. But the humans had not forgotten the Vithari, and they were not going to. The answering fleet moved through open space for 6 days before reaching the boundary of the Voidscar expanse. During those 6 days, the crews trained and prepared and tried not to think too much about what was waiting for them. Admiral Rohr held daily briefings that were short, honest, entirely free of the kind of inspirational nonsense that military commanders sometimes felt obligated to produce. "Here is what we know," he said. On the 4th day, standing in the Defiance's war room with his officers arranged around a holographic display of the Voidscar, "It is going to be bad. Our navigation systems are untested. The gravitational distortions will be unpredictable. We will encounter hazards that we cannot prepare for because no one has survived to describe them. Some of us will not make it through." He paused. He looked at his officers one by one. "But someone needs to be on the other side of that mess. Someone needs to reach the Bethari, and the only people in this galaxy who are willing to try are the people in this room and the people on these ships. So we are going to go in there, and we are going to get through it, and we are going to do it the way humans have always done. Impossible things, one problem at a time, with whatever we have until we are done. Or we cannot continue." He straightened up. His scar caught the light. "That is all. Get some rest. We enter the void Scar tomorrow." Tomorrow came. The fleet reached the boundary, and on every ship 9,000 human beings looked out at the swirling chaos of broken space and felt the full weight of what they had chosen. Lena Ortiz sat at her station on the Curie, her screens alive with data, her hand steady on the controls. The signal was still there, faint and desperate, pulling them forward like a thread in the dark. Captain Ayala stood on the bridge of the Defiance and watched the void scar fill the viewport on a wall of twisted light and shadow that made his eyes hurt if he looked at it too long. Admiral Rohr gave the order, all ships forward, stay tight, stay sharp, and stay human. The answering fleet entered the void scar. Behind them the stars of known space disappeared, swallowed by the chaos. Ahead of them there was only the unknown and the faint dying pulse of 6 billion voices asking the universe question that the universe had refused to answer. The humans were answering it. Now, whatever the cost, the voids was worse than anyone had imagined. They had prepared for it. They had run simulations and studied data and listened to the warnings of every scientist who had ever tried to model what happened when ancient weapons tore space apart. They had expected danger. They had expected chaos. They had not expected it to feel alive. The moment the fleet crossed the boundary, reality changed, not gradually, not gently, but all at once, like stepping through a door into a room where the laws of physics had been written by someone insane. The stars vanished, not because they were too far away to see, but because light itself moved differently. Here, bending and twisting through gravitational distortions that turn straight lines into spirals. The darkness outside the viewports was not the clean, familiar darkness of open space. It was a darkness that moved. It shifted and pulsed like something breathing. On the bridge of the Defiance, Captain Ayala gripped the railing and watched the viewport fill with things that should not have been possible. Corridors of compressed gravity that shimmered like heat haze meant pockets of absolute stillness, surrounded by regions where time itself seemed to stutter, objects moving in jerky, impossible rhythms, and everywhere threaded through the chaos, like veins and flesh, the faint traces of whatever ancient weapons had done. This energy signature so old they had become part of the landscape. All ships report status. Admiral Rohr's voice came through the fleet, calm, steady as stone. The reports came in. Every ship had made it through the boundary. Every ship was intact, but every crew was shaken. The navigation array is online. Report Lieutenant Massey from the Defiance's nav station. His voice was calm, but his eyes were very wide. It is working. Mostly, we are getting real-time gravitational mapping, but the distortions are changing faster than the models predicted. I am compensating manually. How long can you keep that up? Rohr asked. As long as I need to, sir. Rohr nodded. Good man. All ships follow the Defiance's course exactly. No deviations. If your navigation array disagrees with mine, follow mine anyway. We stay together. They moved forward, slowly, carefully, like people walking through a dark house where the floor might not be where they expected it. The science vessel Curry broadcast a constant stream of updated navigational data. Lena Ortiz and her team working without rest, feeding information to the fleet as fast as they could process it. Lena had not slept since they entered the void scar. She was running on coffee and adrenaline and something deeper than either, a kind of focused intensity that her colleagues had learned to recognize and stay out of the way of. Her screen showed the space ahead of them in layers of data, gravitational fields and energy readings and temporal fluctuation maps, and she read them the way a sailor reads the sea. Gravity well forming at bearing 72, she said into the fleet channel. Recommend course adjustment 15 degrees. Port. The fleet adjusted. The gravity well past to their starboard side. Swirling distortion that pulled at the ships like a current in a river. The holes groaned, the crews held on. Another one bearing 315, this one is stronger, recommend course adjustment. 22 degrees starboard and increase to full. Thrust for 30 seconds to clear the pull zone, the fleet adjusted again. Engine strained on smaller ships. Lights flickered as power was diverted to propulsion. It went on like that for hours in an endless series of adjustments, each one a small act of survival, each one guided by Lena's data and the human instinct of the navigators who turned her numbers into action. It was not elegant, it was not the smooth, effortless sailing of Unclear's throat. Elder race fleet moving through clean space with engines that bent reality to their will. It was messy and exhausting and terrifying, and it worked because the people doing it refused to stop. First loss came 18 hours in. The frigates, Condor and Sparrow, were holding position on the fleet's port flank. When the space between them changed, there was no warning. Lena's instruments registered a massive gravitational spike, but by the time the data reached her screen, it was already too late. A gravity shear, a wall of compressed force where space-time folded sharply against itself, unmaterialized directly between the two ships. The Condor was thrown sideways. Its hull buckled, twisted, and the ship was pulled apart at the molecular level. In less than 2 seconds, there was no explosion, there was no sound. One moment the Condor existed, and the next moment it was a cloud of atoms dispersing into the distortion. 47 people gone between one heartbeat and the next. The Sparrow was luckier, if luck was the right word. The edge of the shear caught its stern, ripping away the engine section and sending the remainder of the ship spinning into the void. Crew survived barely, sealed in the forward compartments with emergency life support and no propulsion. The transport Gipali moved in and evacuated them under conditions that no training manual had ever prepared anyone for. Him matching spin rates and extending docking bridges across churning, unpredictable space. 47 dead, the first names on a list that would grow longer. Admiral Rohr did not make a speech. He marked the losses in the fleet log. He noted the position for later memorial, and he gave the order to continue. There would be time for grief later, if there was a later. On the Kari, Lena stared at the data from the gravity shear and felt something cold settle in her chest. She had not seen it coming. Her models had not predicted it. The void scar was not just dangerous in the ways they had expected, it was dangerous in ways that could not be anticipated, that emerged from the chaos. Without pattern or warning, she went back to her models. She tore them apart and rebuilt them from scratch, incorporating every piece of data they had gathered since entering the voids. She worked for 6 hours straight, stopping only to drink water, and when she was done, she had something new, not better exactly, not more accurate in any traditional sense, but different. Her original navigation model had been built on physics, clean mathematical physics, the kind that operated on principles and laws and predictable outcomes. But the void scar did not obey clean physics, it obeyed chaos, and chaos, Lena realized, could not be predicted, but it could be felt. She built a hybrid model, part mathematics, part intuition. The mathematics gave them probability fields, regions where danger was more or less likely. The Intuition came from the navigators themselves. How do human beings whose brains were designed by millions of years of evolution to detect patterns in noise, to sense danger before it could be quantified, to make gut decisions in situations where logic failed? She called it the Ortiz Protocol, though she would have preferred a less dramatic name. The protocol fed her probability data directly to the navigators' displays and asked them to do something no computer could do: feel their way through. It worked, not perfectly, not safely, but it worked better than pure mathematics, because the void scar was not a mathematical place, it was a place that rewarded the kind of thinking that humans excelled at, the irrational, instinctive, pattern-seeking madness of a brain that had evolved to survive on a planet where the weather could kill you, and the animals were all trying to eat you. The elder races had never developed anything like it because the elder races had never needed to. They had engines that could avoid the void scar entirely. They had technology that made danger irrelevant. They had forgotten if they had ever known what it was like to navigate by feel, by fear, by the pounding of blood in the ears and the tightness in the gut that said, turn. Now turn hard, something is wrong. Humans had not forgotten. Humans were built for this. The fleet pressed deeper. Days passed. The routine of crisis became its own kind of normal. Wake up, eat something, go to your station, navigate through impossible space, avoid dying, sleep if you could. Repeat. On the fourth day they encountered the remnants. Lena saw them first on her sensors, large objects, metallic, Choi arranged in formations that suggested purpose rather than accident. She initially thought they were debris from the ancient war that had created the void scar. She was wrong. The remnants were machines, autonomous weapons built by whoever had fought that war millennia ago, still operational, still following their last orders. They were enormous, each one the size of a small warship, angular and brutal in design, covered in armor that had weathered 10,000 years and still held. When the fleet's energy signatures triggered their sensors, they activated with a hum that every ship in the fleet felt through their hulls. Contact, Admiral Rohr said, and his voice was very calm. Battle stations. The fight was unlike anything the human navy had trained for. The remnants were powerful, but rigid. Their weapons were devastating, and energy beams that could cut through hull plating like paper. But their tactics were ancient, programmed for a war that had ended 10,000 years ago against an enemy that no longer existed. They attacked in patterns, mathematical and precise, the same sequences repeated with machine perfection. Human ships were weaker. Their weapons did less damage. Their shields were thinner, but their captains were alive, and alive meant unpredictable. Commander Yuki Tanaka in the frigate Kestrel demonstrated this with terrifying clarity. When three remnants locked onto the transport convoy, she drove her ship directly between them and the transports, not to fight them but to confuse them. She flew erratic patterns, random and senseless, changing speed and direction every few seconds, and the remnants' targeting systems struggled to track her. One, they had been programmed to fight enemies that moved with logic and purpose. Tanaka moved with neither. She moved like a human being who was scared and angry and determined, and the machines could not compute that. While Tanaka drew their fire, the warship Indomitable came around from below and hit all three Remnants with a concentrated barrage that cracked their ancient armor, two, were destroyed, the third limped away. Its programming finally recognizing situation it could not win, but Tanaka's maneuver was only one moment in a battle that lasted 7 hours across the fleet. Similar scenes played out, human ships dodging and weaving and fighting dirty, using tactics that no military academy would have endorsed, a tactics born not from training manuals but from the desperate creativity of people who knew they were outgunned and refused to die. The warship Yamato used itself as bait, drawing a cluster of remnants into a gravity distortion that crushed them. The science vessel Pascal overloaded its sensor array and used the resulting electromagnetic pulse to blind a remnant long enough for the frigate Resolute to destroy it from behind. The crews improvised, adapted, and fought with a furious inventiveness that the machines had no answer for, but the machines were many and the humans were few, and the battle took its toll. The frigate Gallant was hit by 3 energy beams simultaneously and broke apart. Warship Sentinel lost its engine section and had to be towed. The transport Verdun took a hit to its medical bay. Kayan's screams on the comm channel lasted longer than anyone could bear to remember. By the time the last remnant was destroyed or driven off, the fleet had lost 4 more ships and 112 people. The survivors were battered, exhausted, and running on nothing but adrenaline in the stubborn refusal to stop. Admiral Rohr surveyed the damage reports in his war room and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "Get me repair estimates. We are not stopping." They did not stop. They could not stop. Behind them was the long way back through the void scar with no guarantee of survival. Ahead of them was the signal still pulsing weaker now. Lena tracked its degradation with a growing sense of urgency. The Vitari were running out of time. The fleet was running out of time. Everything was running out of time. On the 7th day, Commander Tanaka requested a private channel with Captain Ayala. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Go ahead." Ayala said, "The Kestrel's engines took damage in the fight. My chief engineer has been keeping them running, but they are degrading. We are losing thrust. Within 2 days, we will not be able to keep up with the fleet." Ayala was silent. "I'm not telling you this because I want to stop," Tanaka said quickly. "I am telling you because I need you to know that if it comes to it, I will fall behind before I slow the fleet down. Yuki, Captain, we came here to save 6 billion people. I will not let one frigate be the reason the fleet arrives too late. If the Kestrel cannot keep up, we will find another way to be useful. That is all." Ayala closed his eyes. "Understood, Commander." The fleet pressed on. On the 8th day, they lost the frigate Morning Star to a temporal distortion that aged the ship's systems 1,000 years in the span of seconds. The hull crumbled like old paper. The crew had 6 minutes of warning and evacuated to the nearest transport and escape pods that were barely rated for the conditions. On the 9th day, the Kari sensors detected something ahead. Not a danger, not a weapon. Something else. "I am reading a thinning in the distortion." Clear's throat field, Lena announced on the fleet channel. Her voice was raw from days of constant communication, but it held a note of something that the fleet had not heard in a long time. "Hope that gravitational chaos is decreasing. I think we are approaching the far edge of the voids." The fleet accelerated carefully made every ship's navigator, working with Lena's data in their own instincts, threading through the last barriers of twisted space. On the 10th day, the ship's cook aboard the Defiance, a large, quiet man named George Anquo, who had enlisted because his daughter was on the frigate Resolute, and he could not stand to be at home while she was out here, did something that nobody had asked him to do. He patched into the fleet's internal communications network and started playing music, old Earth songs, colony folk tunes, jazz from the Mars settlements, a lullaby from Titan that every colony child knew. He played them one after another, filling the fleet comm channels with sound, with melody, with the simple human magic of music. In the dark, nobody told him to stop. Nobody wanted him to. On ships across the fleet, short, exhausted crew members lifted their heads and listened, and something in them steadied. It was not rational, it was not tactical, it was just human, the need to hear something beautiful when everything around you was breaking. On the 11th day they broke through. The void scar ended not with a clear boundary, but with a gradual easing, the distortion softening, the chaos fading, reality reasserting itself. Like a patient waking from a fever, the stars came back, not the same stars they had left behind, but new ones, different ones, the stars of a region of space that no human had ever seen. And there, hanging in the void ahead of them, was the Vithari lattice. It was enormous. Lena had read the data, she had known the numbers, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it. The lattice was a structure that defied human architecture, blew a vast web of organic material stretching across thousands of kilometers, strands and nodes and chambers woven together in patterns that were both mathematical and beautiful. Like a living crystal, like a coral reef, grown to the size of a moon. It was dark, not entirely dark. Here and there, faint glimmers of bioluminescence pulsed through the strands. The Vithari, equivalent of emergency lighting, the last reserves of a dying system fighting to stay alive. But most of the lattice was unlit, cold, silent. It was a city going dark, a civilization fading. Lena looked at it and felt the signal she had been tracking for weeks become real, become tangible, become not just data on a screen, but a place, a home, a world full of people she had never met who were counting the hours they had left. "We are here," she whispered. She did not say it on any official channel. She said it to herself, to the signal, to the 6 billion souls in that dying structure who had screamed into the dark and been heard by the most unlikely listeners imaginable. Captain Issa stood on the bridge of the Defiance and stared at the lattice through the viewport. Behind him, the battered remains of the answering fleet spread out against the stars. They had lost 7 ships. They had lost 203 people. They were damaged, exhausted, low on fuel and supplies, and very far from home, and they had made it. He opened the fleet channel. His voice was steady, the way a voice is steady when its owner has decided that whatever comes next, the hard part is already behind them. All ships, this is Captain Ayala. We have arrived at the Vithari lattice. Admiral Roar E. The fleet is at your command. Roar's response was brief. Begin approach. All science vessels forward. Transports hold it safe distance. Warships form a perimeter. He paused. Then he added in a voice that was not quite as steady as he would have liked, "Well done, everyone. Now let us finish what we came to do." The fleet moved toward the lattice, and somewhere, deep inside that vast dying structure, sensors that had been scanning the void for weeks detected the approach of ships that were not conquered, not elder race, not anything in the Vithari database. They were small, they were battered, they were burning fuel they could not spare to reach a people they had never met. They were human, and they had answered. The Vithari did not know what humans were. This was not unusual. Galaxy was vast and humanity was young, and the elder races who dominated galactic civilization did not spend much time talking about the small, short-lived species that clung to the edges of known space. The Vithari had heard the name once or twice in passing, in the way that a person might hear about a small village in a country they had never visited. It had not seemed important. There were thousands of minor species in the galaxy. They came and went. The Vithari, who had existed for 200,000 years, had learned not to keep track, so when their dying sensors detected the approaching fleet, they did not recognize it. The ship designs were unfamiliar. The energy signatures matched no known conquered profile, and the communication signal that the lead ship was broadcasting in rough, unheavily accented arc was coming from a species that the Vithari's database classified as pre-industrial. The database had not been updated in a very long time. Inside the lattice, in the great central chamber where the collective consciousness of the Vithari gathered to make decisions, the resonance stirred. The resonance was not a single being. It was the Vithari's shared voice, a living expression of their communal mind, formed from the thoughts and feelings of billions of individuals merging together, like drops of water forming an ocean. When the resident spoke, it spoke for all of them, and right now all of them were confused. Unknown vessels are approaching, the resident said, and its voice rippled through the lattice like light through water. They are broadcasting on our distress frequency what they claim to be here. In response to our signal, a wave of something passed through the collective consciousness, not hope. The Vithari had spent too many weeks watching their lattice die to feel hope so easily. It was more like bewilderment. They had sent their signal to the galaxy. The conquered had refused to come, and now, out of the chaos of the void scar, ships were arriving that did not belong to any power the Vithari recognized. What are they? The resonance asked itself, which was the same as asking 6 billion individuals simultaneously. The answer came back fragmented, uncertain, small species, young, primitive by conquered standards, barely spacefaring. Why would they come? The residents wondered. No one had an answer for that. Captain Ayala stood on the bridge of the Defiance and looked at the lattice through the viewport. Up close it was even more extraordinary than it had appeared from a distance. The organic strands of the structure glowed faintly with bioluminescence, soft blues and greens and purples that shifted and moved like aurora, even dying, even failing. The lattice was one of the most beautiful things Ayala had ever seen. He opened the communication channel. He had practiced what he was going to say, had gone over it in his head a dozen times during the approach. But now that the moment was here, the practiced words felt wrong, too formal, too careful, so he threw them away and spoke plainly, the way he had spoken his entire life. This is Captain Tomas Ayala, representing the human species. We received your distress signal, and we are here to help. The silence that followed lasted long enough that Ayala began to wonder if the communication systems were working. Then the resonance replied. Its voice came through the speakers in a way that was unlike any voice Ayala had ever heard. It was layered, textured, as if 1,000 people were speaking in perfect unison, each one adding a different shade of meaning to the same words. "We do not understand," the resident said. "You are not conquered." "No," Ayala said, "we are not. Our signal was a cascade pulse. It was intended for conquered species. You should not have been able to receive it. We received it anyway." Another pause. Bioluminescence in the nearest strands of the lattice flickered, a pattern that Lena, watching from the curry, recognized as agitation, yet the conquered refused to send aid. The residents said they determined that rescue was not viable. "The void scar expanse lies between us and the rest of the galaxy. No fleet has crossed it in 10,000 years. We crossed it," Ayala said simply. The silence this time was different. It had weight. "You crossed the void scar," the resonance repeated, and for the first time its layered voice held something that sounded like emotion. "You should not have survived. Some of us did not," Ayala said. "We lost 7 ships and 203 people on the crossing." The flicker of bioluminescence spread through the lattice like a wave, strand after strand lighting up and going dark in rapid succession. The Vithari's version of shock. "You lost your people," the resonant said quietly. "Crossing space that was never meant to be crossed for us." "Yes, why?" It was the simplest question in the universe, and Ayala found that he did not have a complicated answer. "Because you asked for help," he said. The resonance did not respond immediately. Inside the lattice, 6 billion Vithari processed what they had been told. A young and minor species, one they had never heard of, had received their dying signal, had built a fleet, had crossed the void scar expanse at the cost of hundreds of lives, and had arrived at their doorstep with nothing but battered ships and the simple statement that they were here to help. It did not make sense by any measure. The Vithari understood the cost was too high, the risk was too great. The rational thing, the logical thing, the thing that any species with a proper understanding of risk and reward would have done. It was exactly what the conquered had done. Run the numbers, acknowledge the signal, and stay home. The humans had not stayed home. "You should not have come," the resident said at last, and its voice was thick with something that human ears heard. Sorrow. "You are so small, you will die here with us." Issa looked at the dying lattice, at the fading lights in the darkening strands, and he smiled. It was a tired smile, the smile of a man who had been awake for too long and had traveled too far and was standing at the edge of something much larger than himself. But it was real. "Maybe," he said, "but you asked for help, so here we are." The work began immediately. Admiral Rohr divided the fleet into task groups. The science vessels led by the Kari moved in close to the lattice to begin assessment, and the transports positioned themselves at docking points along the lattice's outer structure. The warships established a perimeter, watching the surrounding space for any threat. The first challenge was communication, not the language barrier, which was manageable with translation software, but the conceptual barrier. The Vatari thought differently than humans. Their civilization was built on interconnection, on the seamless sharing of information and feeling across billions of minds they did not have, individual leaders in the human sense. They did not make decisions by debate and vote, they reached consensus through a process that was part thought, part feeling, part instinct, a kind of emotional mathematics that was deeply alien to the human way of doing things. But they tried, both sides tried, and slowly, painfully, they began to understand each other. The lattice's problem was its power core. At the heart of the structure, deep inside a chamber, the size of a small city, was the biological reactor that powered everything. The Vithari called it the heart, and it was exactly that, a living organ, part of the lattice's own biology, that converted ambient cosmic energy into the power that kept 6 billion beings alive. The heart was dying. Dr. Priya Chandra, the astrophysicist from Meridian 9, who had been assigned to the Kari's assessment team, was the first human to see it. She traveled deep into the lattice through passages that glowed faintly with the last reserves of bioluminescence, guided by Vithari escorts who moved through their home with the silent grace of people who had lived there for generations. The heart chamber was vast and dark and warm, and at its center the heart itself pulsed with a dim, irregular rhythm. Priya had studied stellar physics and reactor mechanics and every form of energy generation that human science understood. She had never seen anything like the heart. It was alive, it was beautiful, and it was clearly failing. Its pulses growing weaker, its light fading, the biological processes that sustained it breaking down one by one. How long does it have? Roar asked when Priya sent her report. Days, Priya said. Maybe a week, no more. Can we fix it? Priya hesitated. She was a scientist. She dealt in facts and probabilities and evidence, but the situation called for something beyond science. So we had called for the kind of answer that humans gave when the facts were against them and the alternatives were unacceptable. I do not know, she said, but I have some ideas. The ideas were insane. Every engineer and scientist on the fleet agreed on that point. What Priya proposed was to use human reactor technology, crude nuclear fusion systems that the elder races would have considered primitive, to supplement the heart's failing biological processes. It was like trying to perform open heart surgery using a car engine. The systems were fundamentally incompatible. Human reactors produced energy through controlled nuclear reactions. The heart produced energy through biological processes that human science had never encountered and barely understood. But Priya was stubborn, and the engineers were creative, and desperation has a way of making the impossible merely very difficult. Teams of human engineers entered the heart chamber with their tools and their generators and their miles of cable, and they began the work of connecting two fundamentally different systems. It was brutal, delicate, frustrating work. Every connection was a hack. Every interface was a workaround. Cables were spliced. Adapters were fabricated on the spot from whatever materials were available. And software was written in real time to translate between human power systems and Vithari biology. The Vithari watched this process with a mixture of horror and fascination. Their technology was organic, grown rather than built, elegant and seamless and alive. The human technology that was being bolted onto their heart was mechanical, crude, covered in warning labels and held together with brackets and welding. It was like watching someone attach diesel engine to a flower, but it was working slowly, painfully, imperfectly. It was working. Power trickled into the heart from the human reactors, not enough to restore it, not yet, but enough to slow the decline, to buy time, to push the deadline back from days to weeks. The heart's pulses steadied, slightly, still weak, but no longer fading. It was during this work, on the third day after the fleet's arrival, that Lena found the truth. She had not been looking for it. She had been doing what she always did, analyzing data, following signals, pulling apart the layers of information that the universe constantly produced. The lattice itself was a treasure of data, a living structure that recorded everything that happened within and around it, a kind of organic black box that stored information in patterns of bioluminescence. Lena had been given access to the lattice's data archives as part of the effort to understand the heart's failure. She was looking for clues about what had gone wrong, hoping to find something that would help the engineering teams. What she found instead was a crime. The heart had not failed naturally. The biological processes that sustained it had not broken down due to age or entropy or any of the normal causes of system failure. They had been sabotaged deliberately, carefully, and with a deep understanding of Vithari biology that no outside species should have possessed. Lena found the signature buried deep in the data, hidden under layers of biological noise. It was an energy pattern, a specific frequency that did not belong to the Vithari systems. It was artificial, it was targeted, and it was encoded with a conquered identification marker. She sat in her lab on the Curry and stared at the data for a long time. Her hands were shaking, not from fear. From anger. She contacted Captain Ayala on a secure channel. "Captain," she said, "I need to show you something." He came to the Curry. She showed him. She laid out the data in clear, simple terms, because the truth was simple, even if the crime behind it was complex. Someone had poisoned the heart of the Vithari lattice. Someone had introduced a biological agent that attacked the heart's energy-producing cells, degrading them over time, killing the lattice slowly from within, and that someone had used conquered technology to do it. The conquered did not just refuse to help. Lena said. Her voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a scientist, stating facts while everything inside her screamed. One of their member species caused this. The heart was sabotaged. Ayala sat with this for a moment. His face did not change. He had spent a lifetime in the military, and he had learned to absorb terrible information without showing it on his surface, but Lena could see it in his eyes. The cold, steady burn of a man who had just learned that the galaxy's most powerful civilization was not just indifferent but complicit. The conquered's refusal to send aid, he said. Slowly, the cost-benefit analysis. Cover story. Lena confirmed. They knew the Vithari were dying because someone, the conquered, made it happen. Sheeran then. They made sure no one came to stop it. Why, I can only guess. The Vithari lattice is an extraordinary piece of biotechnology. Their understanding of organic energy systems is unmatched. If the Vithari died, their technology would be available for salvage. Their territory would be open, and no one would know it was anything but a natural disaster, because no one was supposed to make it through the void scar to find out. No one except us. No one except us. Ayala stood up. He walked to the viewport and looked out at the lattice, at its fading lights and failing strands, at the 6 billion lives that were hanging on by a thread. He thought about the Concord's message, that cold, precise assessment of risk and reward. He thought about the senators and the ambassadors and the ancient powerful beings who had looked at this situation and decided that 6 billion people were an acceptable loss. He turned back to Lena. Send this data to Admiral Rohr. All of it, encrypted, and back it up on every ship in the fleet. What are you going to do? Lena asked. I am going to tell the Vithari the truth, he told them. He stood in the great central chamber of the lattice, surrounded by the fading light of a dying civilization, and he told the resonance what Lena had found. He did not soften it. He did not present theories or possibilities. He presented the data clear and irrefutable, and let the Vithari see for themselves what had been done to them. The reaction was unlike anything the humans had witnessed. The lattice shook, not physically, though the vibrations in the organic structure were real enough to be felt. When it shook emotionally, 6 billion minds processing the same terrible truth at the same moment. A wave of grief and rage and betrayal that rolled through the collective consciousness like a storm. The resonance, when it finally spoke, did so in a voice that was barely above a whisper. We trusted them, it said. The Concord was supposed to protect us. Ayala did not have words for what he felt. He was a ship captain, not a diplomat, not a counselor. He did not know what to say to a civilization that had just learned it was being murdered by its own allies, but he said the only thing he could. We are still here, he said, and we are not leaving until the lattice is safe. The work on the heart intensified with the sabotage. Identified, the engineering teams could now target the biological agent that was degrading the heart systems. Priya Chandra and her team developed a countermeasure, a crude but effective chemical treatment that neutralized the agent, clearing the heart's biological pathways and allowing the natural energy production to resume. It was not a permanent fix. The heart had been damaged too severely for a quick repair. But combined with the human reactor supplements, it was enough. The heart's pulses grew stronger. The bioluminescence in the lattice's strands began to brighten slowly, strand by strand, section by section, like dawn, spreading across a landscape. On the 5th day, the first residential section of the lattice came back online. Lights flickered to life. Environmental systems resumed, and in that section Vitari, who had been huddled in the cold and dark for weeks, felt warmth return to their homes. They glowed. It was how Bethari expressed emotion, their bioluminescent bodies lighting up in patterns that conveyed feelings more complex than words could capture. And the pattern they expressed now was one that the human engineers working nearby could not translate but could somehow understand anyway. Gratitude. Overwhelming, wordless, radiant gratitude. Word of the sabotage spread through the fleet like fire. The human crews had been tired before, they had been determined before, but now they were angry, and human anger, properly directed, was a force that the galaxy had not yet learned to reckon with. Engineers worked double shifts. Medical teams treated Vithari patients who had been injured by failing systems, applying human medicine to alien biology with the same improvised ingenuity that had characterized the entire mission. Way Crew members who had no technical skills found other ways to help. Carrying supplies, clearing debris, doing whatever was needed. Admiral Rohr watched all of this from the Defiance and allowed himself, for the first time since the mission began, a moment of something that felt almost like pride. Then he pushed it aside and returned to the problem that had been growing in his mind since Lena's discovery. If the Concord had sabotaged the Vithari, they had done it expecting the Vithari to die quietly, alone, beyond the reach of help. But the Vithari were not dying anymore. The lattice was stabilizing, and the evidence of what the Concord had done was now stored on every ship in the answering fleet. Someone in the Concord was going to realize that their plan had failed, and when they did, they would come to finish the job. Rohr called his captains to a strategy meeting. He laid out the situation plainly. We have to assume they are coming, he said. I do not know when, I do not know how many ships, but they will not allow the Vithari to survive with the evidence of what was done to them. What can we do? Asked Captain Chen of the warship Indomitable. We have 12 combat-capable ships, most of them damaged. A Concord battle group would destroy us in minutes, probably, Rohr said, but we are not leaving. He looked around the room. Nobody argued. Nobody suggested retreat. These were people who had crossed the Void Scar. They were not going to run now. We prepare the best defense we can, Rohr said, and we prepare something else, something that matters more than guns. On the 7th day, the Laddie's lights were coming back on. Across entire sections, the heart was stabilizing. The Vithari were emerging from their shelters, blinking in the returning light, reaching out to touch the humans who had saved them with gentle glowing hands. On the Defiance, Lena Ortiz sat in the communications lab and prepared the most important data transmission of her life. On the long-range sensors, something appeared at the edge of the system. Ships, many ships, moving fast. The Concord had come. They came out of faster than light travel. Like a wall of light, 30 Concord warships materializing at the edge of the star system in a formation so precise it looked like geometry given form. Each ship was enormous, sleek, and beautiful in the cold, functional way that the elder races built things, designed not to impress but to dominate, and impressing anyway because that was what happened when a civilization with 1,000,000 years of experience built something meant to kill. The smallest Concord warship, the formation was larger than the Defiance. The largest was the size of a small moon, a dreadnought-class vessel, whose hull was covered in energy arrays that hummed with more destructive power than humanity's entire military combined. They moved in perfect unison, 30 ships operating as a single entity, and the space around them bent slightly from the sheer gravitational weight of their drives. On the bridge of the Defiance, Captain Ayala watched them arrive and felt the cold settle into his stomach. He had been a military man for 30 years. He knew what he was looking at. This was not a patrol, this was not a diplomatic envoy, and this was a fleet sent to end something. 30 contact, reported the tactical officer, and her voice had the careful steadiness of someone who was very frightened and very determined not to show it. All confirmed. Conquered military vessels, they are slowing to combat approach speed. Admiral Rohr was already on the bridge. He had been there for the past 2 hours, ever since the long-range sensors First detected the approaching fleet. He stood at the center of the command deck, with his hands clasped behind his back, his scarred face unreadable. All ships, battle stations, he said, but no one fires unless I give the order. Understood, no one fires first. Acknowledgements came in from across the fleet, 12 warships battered and patched. From the Voidscar crossing, 6 transports with no weapons at all, 4 science vessels whose most dangerous equipment was a spectral analyzer, against 30 pristine conquered warships, crewed by beings who had been fighting wars since before humanity learned to use fire. The mathematics of the situation were not complicated. Every person in the answering fleet could do the calculation, 12 against 30, with the 30 being individually superior in every measurable way. It was not a battle, it was an execution. Nobody ran. The conquered fleet arranged itself in a hemisphere around the Vithari lattice, surrounding the human ships and cutting off every possible escape route. The formation was a message in itself. There was nowhere to go. A communication signal cut through the silence. It was broadcast on a wide frequency standard conquered diplomatic protocol. When it ended, it carried the identifier of the fleet's commanding officer, High Admiral Tesserin of the Dren, the same crystalline species whose philosopher ambassador had called the humans interesting when they departed weeks ago. But there was nothing philosophical about Tesserin. Her voice was ice and geometry, each word placed with the precision of a weapon. Human vessels. This is High Admiral Tesserin of the conquered combined fleet. You are in violation of conquered navigational authority. You are operating in a restricted zone without authorization. You have interfered with a conquered managed situation. You will withdraw your ships from the Vithari lattice immediately and return to human space. You have 1 standard hour to comply. Failure to comply will result in the use of force. The message ended. Silence on the bridge of the Defiance. Silence across the fleet. Admiral Rohr looked at Captain Ayala. Ayala looked back. Conquered managed situation. Ayala repeated quietly, is that what they are calling it? It seems so. Rohr said, they poisoned 6 billion people, and they are calling it a managed situation. Rohr did not reply. He did not need to. They both knew what the phrase meant. It meant the conquered had come not to rescue the Vithari and not to negotiate with the humans. They had come to clean up a mess. The Vithari were supposed to be dead. The evidence was supposed to be gone, and now 12 human ships were standing in the middle of the crime scene with the proof in their data banks. What are your orders, Admiral? Asked the Defiance's executive officer. Rohr turned to face the viewport. Through the thick glass he could see the conquered fleet and were their ships, glowing with contained power, beautiful and terrifying. Behind them the lattice hung in space, its lights growing stronger now, the bioluminescence spreading through its strands as the heart continued to recover. 6 billion lives flickering back to light. He turned to Aya. Captain, you have been the voice of this mission since the beginning. I think you should be the voice of it now. Ayala stared at him. You want me to respond to a conquered High Admiral? I want you to respond to the galaxy. Ayala understood. He walked to the communications console. He placed his hands on the panel and took a breath. Then he looked at the communications officer. Open a broadband channel, he said. Every frequency, every Relay every listening post and buoy in. Receiver in range, and I want everything. That hears this signal to hear what I'm about to say. The communications officer hesitated for only a moment, then she began routing the signal. Not just to the conquered fleet, not just to the Vithari laddies, to everything, every piece of communications infrastructure within reach of the Defiances. Transmitters which, thanks to the modifications the crew had been making over the past week, was a very long reach indeed. Lena Ortiz aboard the Curry had been preparing for this. She had spent the last 3 days enhancing the fleet's communication range, bouncing signals off the Void Scar's own gravitational distortions, using the chaos that had nearly killed them as an amplifier. It was not supposed to work. The physics said it should not work, but the physics of the Void Scar had never been reliable. One in Lena had learned to use that unreliability as a tool. The signal went out. It rippled through space at the speed of light and then faster, carried by the relay network, amplified by the Void Scar's distortions. Reaching further and further into the galaxy, it reached conquered listening posts, it reached the communication networks of 100 species, it reached the halls of the elder races and the small quiet stations of the minor species that no one ever listened to. The galaxy leaned in. Captain Thomas Ayala, 60 years old, standing on the bridge of a battered warship surrounded by 30 enemy vessels, spoke. This is Captain Thomas Ayala of the United Nations ship Defiance, representing the human species. I am broadcasting on all frequencies to every species within range of the signal. What I have to say concerns all of you. He paused. He looked at the viewport, at the conquered fleet, at the lattice, at the stars. Behind us is the Vithari lattice. It is home to 6 billion living beings. 7 weeks ago they sent a distress signal. Their lattice was dying. Their power systems were failing. They called out to the galaxy for help. The conquered of elder races received that signal. They ran an assessment. They determined that rescue was, and I quote, non-viable. They said the cost was too high. They said the risk was too great, and they let 6 billion people die in the dark. We are humans. We are not members of the conquered. We were not meant to receive that signal. We are a young species, a small species. The elder races consider us primitive. They are probably right. But we heard the signal, and we could not ignore it. We built a fleet. We crossed the Void Scar expanse. We lost 7 ships and 203 people on the crossing. We reached the Vithari, and we discovered something that the conquered did not want anyone to discover. Vithari lattice was not failing due to natural causes. It was sabotaged. The heart of the lattice was poisoned with a biological agent encoded with a conquered identification marker. Someone in the conquered did not just refuse to save the Vithari. Someone in the conquered tried to kill them. We have the evidence. It is stored on every ship in our fleet. It has been transmitted to the Vithari, who have verified it against their own records. It is real. It is irrefutable. And now the conquered has sent 30 warships to this system, not to help, not to investigate, to silence us, to silence the Barthari, to make sure that the truth dies here in the dark where no one will ever know. He stopped. He could feel the weight of the moment, the billions of listeners across the galaxy. The silence on every channel is species he had never met. and would never meet. Held their breath and waited. You can destroy us, he said, and his voice was quiet now, not angry, not defiant, just honest. 30 ships against 12, you can burn our fleet and finish what you started with the Vithari and go home and tell the galaxy that nothing happened here, but you cannot do it quietly, not anymore. Every species with a receiver is hearing this right now. Every relay boy in range is recording this transmission. The truth is out. It is already traveling. You can kill us, but you cannot kill what we have said. We are humans. We are small and young, and we do not have your ships or your weapons or your million years of history, but we came here because someone was dying and asked for help. That is who we are. That is what we do. And if you want to punish us for that, then go ahead, but do it in front of the whole galaxy. Do it while everyone is watching. He released the transmit button, and GT clears throat. And GT, the signal went silent on the bridge of the Defiance. No one moved. Every eye was on the viewport, on the conquered fleet, on the 30 ships that could end them all in the time it took to give the order. The silence lasted for a long time. Aboard the conquered dreadnought, High Admiral Tesserin stood in her command center, surrounded by her officers, and calculated. She was Dren. Her species thought in crystalline patterns, logic and geometry, and the clean mathematics of cause and effect. She had been given orders. The orders were clear: secure the Vithari system, remove the human presence, eliminate the evidence. But the human captain had just broadcast that evidence to the galaxy. Taran's calculations shifted. Destroying the human fleet had been a clean solution when the truth was contained. But the truth was no longer contained. It was already propagating through the relay network, reaching species after species, government after government. If Takarin destroyed the human fleet now, it would not erase the evidence. It would confirm it. The destruction of 12 ships of rescuers by the very power accused of genocide would be the most damning proof imaginable. The humans had done something that Taran's calculations had not accounted for, and they had turned their own destruction into a weapon. They had made their vulnerability into their shield. If the conquered killed them, the conquered proved them right. If the conquered let them live, the truth survived anyway. It was Tesserin had to admit a remarkably effective strategy for a species that was supposed to be primitive. On the open channels, voices began to speak. They came from the edges of the galaxy, from the small and forgotten places, from species that the conquered had overlooked or ignored or marginalized for millennia. The Kalori, a species of gas giant dwellers who had not spoken in conquered channels for 300 years. The Mthani, a desert species whose request for conquered membership had been denied 4 times. The Orth, the Fennec, the Tezali, dozens of minor species whose names the elder races barely knew. They did not have fleets. They did not have weapons. They did not have the power to change anything by force, but they had voices and they used them. We are listening, the Kalori said. We hear you, the Methani said. We are watching, the Orth said. One by one they joined the channel, small voices, quiet voices, voices that had never mattered in the grand politics of the galaxy, but together they were not quiet at all. Together they were a chorus, and the chorus was growing louder. On the conquered dreadnought, Taran watched the communication logs filled with messages from species she had never considered worth tracking. Her officers shifted uncomfortably. This was not in the plan. This was not how the galaxy was supposed to work. The minor species were supposed to stay quiet. They were supposed to know their place. Mana, then a voice spoke that was not minor at all. The Silith ambassador, the ancient amphibian, who had watched the human fleet depart weeks ago with pity in her large dark eyes, broke protocol. She was on a Concord observation platform, surrounded by Concord officials, and she opened a direct channel to the fleet and spoke without authorization and without apology. "I am Ambassador Nath of the Silith Collective," she said, and her voice carried the weight of 8,000 years of life. "I have served the Concord for longer than most member species have existed. I have watched civilizations rise and fall. I have seen the Concord do great things and terrible things, but I have never seen anything like what I have seen today." She paused. The galaxy waited. 12 ships, she said, 12 small, fragile, well-human ships crossed the Voidscar expanse to answer a signal that was not meant for them. They lost their people. They saved 6 billion lives, and now they stand outnumbered and outgunned, and they refuse to move. "Hi, Admiral Tesserin, I know you have your orders. I know the mathematics of your situation. But I ask you to consider something that mathematics cannot measure." These humans answered a signal. They did not have to. No one expected them to. No one asked them to. They heard someone crying for help, and they came, not because it was rational, not because it was safe, not because they had anything to gain, but because something inside them could not do otherwise, and now you would kill them for it. Her voice hardened. "What does that make us? What does the Concord become in the eyes of every species listening right now if we destroy the only people in this galaxy who answered the call?" Taryn did not respond immediately. She stood in her command center and felt for the first time in her long career the ground shifting beneath her feet. Not physically, politically. The Concord's power had always rested on the assumption that the elder races were the moral center of the galaxy, the wisest, the most advanced, the most worthy of leadership. That assumption was cracking. 12 human ships had cracked it. On the bridge of the Defiance, Ayala stood and watched and waited. He had said what he had to say. He had done what he could do. The rest was out of his hands. Beside him, Admiral Rohr watched the tactical display. The Concord fleet had not moved. They had not powered weapons. They had not advanced. They were holding position. Onrog knew enough about military operations to know what that meant. It meant someone was reconsidering. "They are not firing," Rohr said quietly. "Not yet," Ayala said. "Not ever," Rohr said. And there was certainty in his voice that surprised even himself. "Listen to the channels, Tomas. Listen to what is happening." Ayala listened. The voices were still coming, still growing. Species he had never heard of, worlds he could not find on a map, people he would never meet, all of them saying the same thing in different words. "We are watching. We are listening. We see what you did. We see what you are." The Concord fleet held position for 3 hours. During those 3 hours the galaxy changed, not with weapons or treaties or grand declarations, but with the slow on a steady accumulation of voices saying that they had heard the truth and they would not forget it. Diplomatic channels that had been quiet for centuries came alive. species that had never cooperated, began talking to each other. Something was stirring, something that the conquered had not anticipated and could not control. At the end of those 3 hours, High Admiral Taran opened a channel to the Defiance. Her voice was as precise as ever, but there was something in it that had not been there before. Yala thought it might be doubt. Human vessel, Takarin said. Conquered combined fleet will withdraw from this system. An investigative commission will be established to examine the allegations regarding the Vithari laddies until such time as the investigation is complete with the Vithari system is to be considered under joint protection. She paused. This is not an acknowledgement of guilt. This is not a concession. This is a practical decision based on current circumstances. Understood, High Admiral Yala said. Captain Yala, yes. A long silence. Then Takarin said something that was not in any protocol manual, something that a Dren High Admiral was not supposed to say. Your species is a problem, Ayala almost smiled. We get that a lot. The conquered fleet withdrew. They turned those 30 gleaming ships and they moved away from the Vithari system in perfect formation, disappearing into faster than light travel one by one until the space around the lattice was empty of everything except the battered, beautiful, impossible answering fleet. On the lattice, the lights were coming back on. Well, not all of them, not yet. The heart was stabilizing, but still weak, still dependent on the human reactor supplements, still bearing the scars of its poisoning, but the darkness was retreating, section by section, strand by strand. The Vithari's home was coming alive again. Bioluminescence rippled through the structure in waves of color, blue and green and gold and purple, the Vithari's way of expressing what they felt, and what they felt was something that had no exact translation in any human language, but that the humans understood anyway. The resonance spoke, its voice filled the lattice and reached the human ships through every open channel, layered and vast and trembling with emotion. You came for us. It said. You did not know us. You had nothing to gain. You had everything to lose, and you came. The conquered who knew us, to who were our allies, who shared our galaxy for 200,000 years, tried to destroy us, and you who were strangers, who were small, who were young, you crossed the impossible and saved us. We will not forget. The Vithari will not forget. For as long as our lattice endures, for as long as our species lives, we will remember what humanity did. We will remember the ships that came. We will remember the people who died so that we could live. We will remember. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy rearranged itself. The conquered did not collapse. Institutions that old and that powerful do not collapse quickly, but they cracked. The investigation into the Vithari sabotage revealed what everyone already suspected, that a faction within the conquered, led by interests who coveted Vithari biotechnology, had orchestrated the attack. What the revelation did not destroy the conquered, but it destroyed the myth of the conquered's benevolence. And myths once broken do not heal. Minor species across the galaxy, emboldened by what they had witnessed, began forming their own alliances. The Kalori and the Emthani and the Oreth and dozens of other species that had spent centuries being ignored found each other and found their voices. They called themselves the Open Signal Coalition, named for the Vithari's original broadcast that had been heard by the most unlikely listeners in the galaxy. Humanity became something it had never been before, not powerful, not feared, not mighty, something else entirely. The species that answered, the species that heard a cry in the dark and came running, not because it made sense, but because they could not do otherwise. Diplomatic envoys arrived from across the galaxy, trade agreements were signed, cultural exchanges were established, not because humanity had proven its strength, but because it had proven something that the galaxy had forgotten was possible, that you could hear a stranger's pain and choose to bear it with them, that the measure of a civilization was not its age or its technology, but its willingness to help. The Vitharian humanity signed a formal alliance, the first of its kind between a former conquered species and a minor species. The ceremony was held on the lattice in the great central chamber, with the heart pulsing steadily in the background, its biological rhythms now supported by a permanent integration of human and Vithari technology. It was an ugly integration, my cables and organic strands woven together in patterns that no designer would have chosen, but it worked, and sometimes working was enough. Commander Yuki Tanaka's name was engraved on the memorial. Her frigate, the Kestrel, had lost power during the final days of the rescue, and she had ordered her crew to evacuate while she used the ship's last reserves to draw a cluster of remnants away from the transport convoy, detonating the reactor. In their midst, her last transmission had been recorded and was played at the memorial ceremony. Tell them we were here, they told them, the names of every human who died in the crossing and the rescue. All 203 of them were engraved in bioluminescent crystal and set into the outer surface of the lattice. The Vithari tended them like a garden, maintaining the glow, readjusting the colors, ensuring that the names were always bright, always visible, a permanent testament to the people who had come from across the stars to save a civilization they had never known. At night, when the lattice's systems dim for the Vithari's rest cycle, the names glowed on 203 points of light, shining in the dark, the human dead, keeping watch over the Vithari living. Captain Thomas Ayala returned to Earth. He was offered promotions, ambassadorships, positions of honor and authority. He turned them all down. He asked to be reassigned to Meridian 9. You want to go back to the relay station? The Admiral asked, bewildered. Yes, Ayala said. Tomas, you are a hero. Every government in human space wants to give you a medal. The Vithari named a section of their lattice after you. Hux, you could have any posting you want. I want the relay station. He went back. Meridian 9 was the same as he had left. It scratched metal walls, flickering lights, the coffee machine that sounded like a dying animal. The crew had been replaced, mostly younger people who looked at Ayala with wide eyes and tried not to stare at the man who had talked down a conquered fleet. He did not mind. He was not the kind of man who needed to be stared at. Dr. Lena Ortiz went back. She was offered positions at every university and research institution in human space. She took none of them. She returned to Meridian 9, to her console, to the quiet work of listening to the signals that filled the universe. Why? People asked her, why go back to a relay station in the middle of nowhere? She did not explain. Well, Trey, because the explanation was simple enough that it did not need words. She went back Because the universe was full of signals, full of voices, full of whispers, full of cries for help that traveled through the void and reached the ears of whoever was listening, and someone needed to listen. On her first night back, she sat at her console and calibrated the receivers and scanned the frequencies one by one, the way she had done for 12 years before the Vithari signal changed everything. The stars were quiet, the data streams were clean. The universe hummed with its normal, everyday noise, the background radiation of a cosmos that did not care about the small creatures that lived inside it. She adjusted her glasses, she took a sip of coffee, she listened, and she knew, with a certainty that went beyond science and logic and everything, she had been trained to trust that another signal would come, maybe tomorrow, maybe in a year, maybe in a decade, but it would come because the universe was vast and full of life, and life had a way of getting into trouble, and trouble had a way of producing cries for help that traveled through the dark looking for someone, anyone who was willing to hear. She would be here, humanity would be here, and when the signal came, they would do what they had always done. What they would always do, what no amount of logic or mathematics or cold calculation could ever stop them from doing. Outside the viewport, the stars burned on, ancient and indifferent, but Meridian 9 was not indifferent. Its receivers were open, its crew was listening, and somewhere in a corner of the galaxy that no map had yet named, someone was about to need help. They would answer.